thank you for coming to the Biointegrative Health Center International of Reno. This live webinar is put on by them. And today we are talking about reducing food waste. And I'm really excited about this topic. Okay, so just a little bit about me. I'm Kelli Hirt. I am a second-year Master of Public Health student at the University of Minnesota. I'm also a certified health education specialist. And within public health, the food system, nutrition, all things food is my biggest passion. That's definitely the career path I want to go towards. But I also believe that food is really a part of all things health. So again, super excited to be talking about food waste today. So tonight we're going to talk about a few different things. We're kind of going to look at the statistics of food waste. We're going to look at what type of impact food waste has on us personally and collectively as a society. And then we're also going to talk about really realistic ways that you can reduce food waste at home and kind of help do your part to reduce the impact of food waste. So let's start with some food waste in numbers. And I'm sorry, let me go back and say, if you have any questions throughout this that are really relevant to what we're talking about in that moment, definitely feel free to unmute and just say, hey, Kelli, I have a question. Otherwise, we will have time for questions at the end, or you can just pop it in the chat and I will get to it at some point. Okay, but food waste statistics. So first of all, I think it's just really important to think about the scale of how much food is wasted. And this is in America. Americans throw out about 40% of the food that we buy each year, which is mind-blowing. Like, think about how much food you buy and then, you know, you only use 60% of that, just a little over half. That's just, it's wild for me, especially to think about that. So just, you know, to break it down a little bit more, what does 40% mean? That's 72 billion pounds total as Americans, and then 400 pounds a person each year. This little infographic at the bottom here just kind of shows where food is wasted. And you can see that the two biggest places that it's wasted is at consumer-facing businesses, so restaurants, you know, different things like that, grocery stores, and then at home is the highest source of food waste. So what do we do about that? To break it down a little more and put it in terms of just like how much we really do waste, let's think about a banana, a common produce item that a lot of people buy. I just kind of looked up really quick and did some quick math. A normal banana is usually around 58 cents a pound, sometimes cheaper if you're in the Midwest. You know, you go to Quick Trip and they're super cheap. Just a little fun fact. But 400 times 0.58, that leads to $232 wasted if you're throwing away 400 pounds of bananas. And I know that you're not going to be throwing away just this much of one thing, but just to kind of think about like these common foods that actually get thrown out quite a bit. So then tomatoes, usually about $1.98 per pound. If 400 pounds of tomatoes are thrown out by one person, that's $792 wasted. So just think for a second about like some foods that you really love to have on hand. And oftentimes, you know, you have to throw one or two out and it doesn't seem like much, but might add up to a lot. So if that's meat, it's going to be a lot more per pound. If it's produce, it might be a little less. And just think like, what would you do with that money that you saved? I personally, I mean, you know, I'm a student, so I should be responsible and put it towards some tuition, but $792, you could buy a plane ticket, you could go on a little road trip, you could go to an awesome concert or two, you could do a lot. And then I just have a few quotes peppered in throughout here because I love quotes, and I think that this one is really beautiful. Respect for food is a respect for life, for who we are and what we do. And to me, food is really, it encompasses, you know, health and connection and just, you know, taking care of yourself. And we want to make sure that we're also taking care of the world when we're eating. So what are some personal and societal impacts? So we'll start with personal impacts. We just went through that whole math slide. When you reduce your food waste, you're going to save money. Reducing food waste reduces your environmental footprint, which means how much you basically use from the world. And then it saves you time. If you reduce your food waste, you're probably meal prepping, meal planning, making grocery lists, and just really kind of keeping yourself organized in the kitchen, which goes back, it saves you time, it saves you money. And then, like I just said, it helps you prioritize in the kitchen, and it helps us connect better with our food because we're a little more cognizant of how much we're using, what we're using, when we're using it. And then it also gives us a way to be really creative in the kitchen. And we'll talk a little bit more about ways that you can like reduce your impact later again. Societal impact. I think it's really important to talk about the hunger that so many millions of Americans face in the context of food waste, because we're wasting a lot of food, and yet so many people don't have food to eat. So we need to figure out a better system, and we, as in America, and our government and community organizations. But in 2019, 35 million Americans struggled with hunger, and that included more than 10 million children. Currently, COVID-19 has skyrocketed that number. It's really put a strain on everyone in the whole world, but America, it's increased our hunger to about 50 million people, and that's including 17 million children. And 25% of children could face hunger in the next few months because of it. So why, again, does this relate to food waste? Because America has enough food to comfortably feed everyone. And yet we're not doing that. So again, we just need to really figure out what we can do as individuals and as a society to reduce our impact on, you know, societal inequities and on the planet in general. So I touched a little bit on the environmental impact it has, but food waste is actually a huge contributor to climate change, and it's putting a lot of greenhouse gases into the air that are really heating up our earth. So decaying food in landfills actually produces methane, which is a harmful greenhouse gas. It's the same that you'll hear about from farms and cows, but yet it's food that's just rotting. 21% of a landfill makeup is food waste, and that's food waste that can be recovered and used, but just happens to not be. And then 11% of greenhouse gases could be reduced if we stopped wasting food. So basically what this is saying is like 11% of greenhouse gases come from the food that we choose not to eat. And then food waste equals energy waste. That means that a lot of resources go into the food that we grow and produce. And when we throw that away, we're also throwing away everything that went into that food item or that meal. And here's just an infographic from the NRDC. And I'm actually just going to walk through each little bit of this because I think it's really important. So 2.6% of all US greenhouse gases emissions come from food waste. 21% of agricultural water usage is wasted. This one right here, 1,250 calories per person per day is wasted. And again, like, think of how many millions of people are facing hunger in America. That could feed someone. That could feed everyone in the United States. 19% of all US croplands is wasted. 21% of the landfill content, I already said that. And then a lot of money is also wasted. So America is doing some things. Places around the world have really amped up their game, basically, and have recovered a lot of food waste and redistributed it. But what is happening in America is there are many different ways that we can recover food and we can redistribute it to get it to people who need it, and also so that we don't waste it. And that comes from food rescue programs. These are really important because, again, it takes food that we might just throw away because we don't have use for it. And we might be, grocery stores, restaurants, farms even. And it gives it to people who will use it. A couple different types that you might have heard of are imperfect foods, otherwise known as imperfect produce, but they now have a lot more like food products, that you can get. So since they started, 139 million pounds of produce have been saved. Misfits Market is also a food recovery program, and that's kind of like imperfect foods. And then there's also local food rescue programs, and that can be through schools, through churches, through community organizations. There are a few federal programs like that. And those are really great. At the end of this PowerPoint, I have a resource slide, and I have a link to a place where you can look up your local food rescue programs and just kind of see what's happening, if there's anything you can do to get involved, things like that. Just, to drive the point home, there's food for everyone on the planet, but not everyone eats. I think that's really powerful when we're talking about the impact that each individual person can have on the ability for someone else to eat, and also on the planet. And I do just kind of want to do a little disclaimer because it sounds like I'm putting a lot of blame on the consumer. And while we do throw away a lot of food, there are also ways that, big corporations, big business can get involved and do something to kind of help us, help ourselves really. But while we're waiting for, those better systems to be in place, we can do something at home and also just save money on our end. So here are a few ways that we can do that. The first is some basic shopping tips. Make a list and stick to it. A lot of times, if you don't make a list, you end up overbuying food that you kind of just caught your eye, sounded really good. You thought, maybe I'll use that for a meal. And because you don't have a list, you're really unsure of what you actually need. You might have more of it at home. Just make a list and try and stick to it as best you can. Number 2 seems really lame almost, but don't grocery shop when you are hungry, because you are absolutely going to fall into just about every sale, every treat that is your favorite. I've been there. Maybe I'm speaking more from experience here. But grocery shopping when you're hungry is just a bad idea for you and your wallet, and inevitably food waste. So, have a little snack before you go. And then another thing, a lot of things that we throw out are fruits and veggies. Buying frozen fruits and veggies, there's absolutely no shame in that. They are picked at their peak ripeness, and they are flash frozen and shipped away when they're ready to eat. So they're actually great quality and they last a lot longer, and they're usually a little cheaper than buying fresh produce. The second tip for reducing food waste at home is meal prepping. And that meal prepping sounds like a very daunting, hoity-toity, like wellness scheme. And it can be, like, you can totally make it that way if you want it to, and there's no shame in that. But it's also just laying out what you're going to eat for that week. And then it can be as simple as, I know that I'm going to eat this produce for a snack this week. I'm just going to cut it up and put it in the fridge, so I can just grab it and eat it when I'm ready. That actually makes us more likely to eat that food. And it's really quick. And I know that we're all at home and we're not on the run as much as we used to be, but still, we're all working from home. We still have limited time to, in between some things, to grab a snack, grab a meal. Meal prepping is just a great way to ensure that you're eating better, taking care of yourself, and reducing your food waste. So, like I said, you cook or prepare the food ahead of time. This is really helpful if you're cooking for one. I usually make something at the beginning of the week, and maybe I freeze half of it and save it for a couple weeks from then, so I'm not eating it for 2 weeks in a row, if that makes sense. And then, like I said, just mapping out your meals tells you what and how much to buy. And that can really guide your grocery shopping trip and list. And then this little template on the side, this is one that I actually use. I love it. I don't know if it's because of the colors, but I think it's fun. I just put in like my main things, and then I just write snacks at the bottom or like in between the lines. And you can just Google. There's lots of free templates on Google. Or you can just write on a piece of paper. Simple as that. Storing food at home. Believe it or not, there are actually correct ways to store produce, to store meat, to store just about everything that we eat. And incorrectly storing food can actually make your food go bad much more quickly. On the next slide, I have like a picture I'll walk through on how to store food best, like in the refrigerator and stuff. But I do just want to point out Fresh Paper, and I'm not, affiliated with them at all. I just have used it. Fresh Paper is an organic sheet of fabric, basically, that is soaked in herbs. And it actually originated from a woman whose grandmother in India used to keep things, and she would do it in this herb mixture, and they would stay for a long time. And she thought, okay, well, if that worked for my grandma, and we have this food waste problem, is there something I can do? So honestly, you just cut off a little chunk of it, and then you put it in with your fruits, veggies, whatever, and it keeps your food 2 to 4 times longer. And I only included it because I've used it for the last 1.5 years, and it truly works. And it's super cheap. I bought a pack last year, and I'm still using some right now. So just a little fun, and here's a little link if you want to look into it more. So this is the little infographic about how to store food properly. So you'll always want your meats and dairy to be on the bottom shelf of your fridge, because you don't want juices dripping from, say, if it was on top, you don't want an accident and meat juices to be dripping to the second shelf where you might have produce, and then that's all garbage then. So the top shelf, this is where you're going to put your meal prepping items. You're going to put your condiments, your fruits, things like that. Middle shelf, leftovers. Okay, maybe that's for your meal prepped food. That's up to you there. Bottom shelf, like I said, meat, milk, and other dairy products. And then veggies and herbs will go in the crispers in there. And you can just kind of look at this, on your own time too, and think about like, how can you store your food better? Fresh herbs, if you're buying fresh herbs, maybe put them in a jar of water in your fridge, because that will keep them longer. Nuts and seeds, keep those in a glass jar in your fridge is best. But yeah, that wasn't on here, so just a little side note. And then composting. You can compost at home, and this also might sound really overwhelming at first glance, but let's just dive a little bit into composting and what it is. Composting is a natural process of recycling organic matter into a fertilizer that enriches soil and plants. And 30% of what we throw away can actually be composted. So we throw away 40% of our food, and 30% of that is good for compost. All right, so what's the difference between a compost and a landfill? It's rotting food. There's got to be something wrong there. Benefits of composting, it saves the food from entering landfill. And when you're composting, you're actually actively rotting that food with other food that is not being contaminated by everything else in the landfill. And when you're actively composting, you will be able to create a mixture that you can mix into soil that's filled with nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, which makes for really healthy soil. And then it also increases soil's water retention. So it really helps save a lot of water in the growing process. Irrigation really, we waste a lot of water with that, and using that natural organic compost really helps to save water. Okay, so composting is super easy. How do you compost? There are a couple ways to compost, but we're just gonna focus on like a really simple way. You can keep a compost bin in your yard. So like my parents, they have a garden and they just put a little section in the corner where they throw all the food waste. They kind of stir it up every now and then, and that turns into soil. You can also, oh my Lord, I do not know what is going on. I'm sorry. Okay, you can sign up for local compost programs. So for example, I participate in a local compost program where I live in Minneapolis. And not every place has this, but I did include a couple links for Reno and Minneapolis, these free composting programs. So I keep this little bucket on the right under my sink, or in my kitchen. I throw my food waste in there, and then I have a compost bin, much like a garbage bin, that gets picked up weekly. And that organics recycling program picks it up, turns it into soil, and then community residents are able to use that soil for free. And if you don't have a program like that, there are also many community gardens who have a compost program. It's not necessarily a pickup program, but you can drop it off there, and then you'll be able to use that soil at the end of the season. So super cool. Composting is awesome, and it's relatively easy and very cheap. So what can you compost? On the left, that is a personal photo of my compost last week. You can throw just about anything in there. And this is on the right is a poor quality photo of what I have on my fridge to remind me what we can compost. So fruits, veggies, meat, fish bones, dairy products, eggs and eggshells. Those are really good for the soil. Basically any whole food. A lot of takeout containers are now compostable, which is awesome. It'll say right on there. Some produce bags from the grocery store are compostable. And then things like coffee grounds, house plants and flowers, tea bags, you can also compost those. So lots of things that we would normally just throw away, like our paper egg cartons, our napkins, because they're gross and where else would they go? But they actually they do break down and compost. And that's a good way to get rid of them. So if you don't do all that, that's okay too, but there are other ways you can reduce food waste at home, and that's by repurposing your bad food. So like I said, these are just a couple ideas. If you have bad bananas, think about making banana bread or muffins. You could freeze the bananas, peel them first, put them in a little container, and then you can use those in smoothies or milkshakes. Super good. If your tomatoes are kind of going bad, you can cut off the bad spot, turn them into salsa. You can either chop them up or put them in a food processor. They still taste fine as long as you're not eating like a moldy part. And then saving your veggie greens. This is something that truly I just started to do because they're beautiful and why not use them? So you can make beet green pesto, sauteed beet / radish greens, kind of like you would saute spinach, or you could make collard greens out of these other greens too. And there are some recipe links at the end of this as well. And another thing you can do is, I put a little photo on this. Sorry to be hopping back and forth, but this photo right here is homemade veggie broth. It's a super easy way to save food if you're not composting. Even if you are composting, it's a great way to get all the nutrients from those unusable parts of vegetables or, undesirable parts. So I am just gonna make sure that you can hear my computer sound. And then I'm gonna play you this video of how to make homemade veggie broth. Okay, so super quick and easy. It really only takes like 5 minutes to put together. And like you saw, I just keep a freezer bag, and if I'm, cutting, there's a whole sweet potato in there because it was kind of going bad and just not usable. Cabbage, onions, just the skin of food, literally anything. And then when I'm done with that, the veggies that I used in there, I just compost those when I'm done. So and finally, just cutting food waste is a delicious way of saving money, helping to feed the world and protect the planet. And that is what I have for you. So thank you very much for being here. I do have a poll that I'm going to launch. So if you could just take a second to do that, I would really appreciate it. And then we can, dive into any questions anyone has. Does anyone have any questions, comments, concerns off the top of your head?
Hey, Kelly, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Hey, so the problem we have in our household is that we overbuy like fruits and veg, thinking that it'll last fairly long.
Yeah.
But depending on the store we go to, it doesn't really last that long. What do you think is the average like fridge life of like lettuce or tomatoes or green beans? Like those are the stuff that we always overbuy. Broccoli.
Yeah. I guess it kind of depends on like your fridge settings. I know like I lived in a place last year that my fridge was just so bad. And like everything I bought lasted like 2 days. But just to clarify, your answer is what is the shelf life of those things usually, or like how should you plan that?
Yeah, like
And what's the
general shelf life? And I guess it's 2 questions. What's the general shelf life, and like how much, like when you go to the store, how much should you really buy? Like for 3 days, like to last you for 3 days of this lettuce, or
Yeah, that's a great question. Fresh lettuce, I mean, things like that, I would say a week usually is like a good average. Sometimes it can last longer. Like I buy romaine hearts usually, and I don't know, I keep those for like 2 weeks, 2 or 3 weeks. But I would say that like up to a week. But also I don't know how big your family is, Sheehan, or what that looks like, but I truly do recommend the fresh paper. I think it's $10 for it's like 5 sheets, and you cut it up and you can just stick it in your drawer. And it keeps things for like weeks.
Okay.
So I guess maybe something that would be really helpful for you, and maybe a fun activity for your family, is to kind of just look at things like, what are the things that you normally eat? How often do you eat them? And then say like, okay, if I'm only eating green beans once a week, kind of looking at like, when's the best time to buy those? Like if you're gonna eat them on a Wednesday, maybe shop for them on the Sunday. I guess just really being kind of aware of how you're using it, when you're using it, if that makes sense.
Okay. And then can you buy that fresh paper anywhere? Is that something you can buy like at Target, or is it something
that... Sorry. I ordered it online.
Okay.
I haven't seen it in store anywhere. I'm sure that there's like other brands that are kind of like that.
Mhm.
Even like keeping things in plastic, it doesn't give them any airflow. It just kind of traps in moisture, and that will make them go bad a little quicker. So keeping things in glass, um, or just, you know, your lettuce out in the crisper can
Okay.
help it. Yeah. And then put just another little tip, put like a paper towel down at the bottom of your crisper, or even under your fruit, because it will absorb some moisture that um, might make it go bad quicker.
Okay. Then I don't know if you went over this, but what kind of foods should you really be putting in your fridge? Like I've heard people should I've heard that citrus should go in the fridge. Then some people say that citrus should not go in the fridge. I mean,
Yeah.
what do you think?
I wish that I had like a really good list in my mind. I actually have something on my refrigerator at home that tells me what I can and can't put in the fridge. But honestly, um, like bananas and tomatoes shouldn't go in the fridge. I think off the top of my head, but that's something I would just do a quick Google search, or you can go on. I know like the thing that I have on my fridge is from Imperfect Foods. Um, just Google like, what should I store in my fridge? And I will say that at the end of this presentation, there is a link to like a really comprehensive storage guide.
Okay.
So that might be helpful to check out.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so I have a couple questions in the chat, and the first one is, do frozen fruits or vegetables give you any less nutrients, vitamins, etc.? No. In fact, they have the same amount, if not more, because like I said, they're picked at their peak ripeness, flash frozen, and that locks in the nutrients. So they're a super great option for anyone. Thank you, Jake, for that question. Okay, and then Jeffrey said, thank you, Jeff, first of all. And then I don't know the average cost of food rescue programs. Do you mean like a community funded one, or like an organization, or the, you know, like Imperfect Foods or something? If you want to unmute.
Yeah. So just thanks for taking that question, Kelly. Yeah, things just like Imperfect Foods, because I know I've seen them advertised fairly often, and it seems like there's more and more of them. I just didn't really know.
Yeah.
Like, you know, because some people will say like, oh, they swear by like cooking services like Blue Apron and such like that, but they can be fairly expensive. Where I'm not quite sure about these services.
Yeah. I don't know the average cost. I mean, there's different like tiers that people can get. I think like Imperfect Produce starts at like $15 for a box, and that's just a really basic thing. And then there's like an organic option, and that is like starting at $20, something like that. So it's really, I think they give a lot of like leeway for kind of make it your own. So, I mean, they're not necessarily, I think they do have like low income boxes too, which I think is newer, and I haven't looked into those much, but I'm hoping that they're like a really good thing, and not just touting like, hey, here's a low income box, but really it's not attainable for someone who actually doesn't make a large income. The next question is, for people who have never meal planned, how far ahead would you advise planning for to start out? That's a great question. You know, start small. You could even just say, hey, I'm gonna meal plan, meal prep just my lunches this week. I would say a week is definitely like a typical, like a work week for sure. 5 days is a typical timeline. I only do a week. Sometimes it ends up lasting me 2 weeks because I'm usually cooking for one. And then I'm just eating leftovers, which is totally fine. But then it also, you know, I need to take that into account if I plan on eating, if I'm grocery shopping for 2 weeks, but food meal prepping for 2 weeks as well. And I end up, you know, all my meals from week 1 fall into week 2, then I just need to be cognizant that I don't buy more food for that 3rd week, if that makes sense, so that doesn't spill over. But I would say just start out small. Like I said, even if you just want to plan your lunches, plan your breakfast, those are a little less daunting than a dinner. But I would say 5 to 7 days is a good timeline. And then when thinking about the different ways of preserving or cooking foods, does freezing preserve all the nutritional value for foods? Would you endorse canned foods similarly? Yes, freezing is awesome for them. No, I would not endorse canned foods similarly. Okay, false. I would endorse them, but with a few caveats, and that is many times when foods are canned, a lot of salt or sugar is added to help preserve them. And they're not necessarily as nutritious as a frozen meal would be, or frozen fruits or vegetables would be, but they're a great option for people who aren't able to afford fresh fruits and vegetables, aren't able to eat that much. You know, like if you're buying a head of lettuce or a head of cabbage, like those things can last forever. Or, you know, last you a long time if there's just one of you eating, but like a pear might go bad in 2 days after you get it. So just kind of being aware of, you know, what can you sub in, what can't you? So just when you're using canned foods, the most important thing I would say, just rinse them before you use them, and then they're fine. But yeah, those were great questions. Is there anything else anyone is wondering?
Maybe to follow up to your use of greens on the parts that we're not typically using. Are there any kind of common greens that can't be used in that way, or is there like a maybe guide that you follow that could direct which might not be still like suitable for eating? Or
yeah, that's a good question. Off the top of my head, I don't know if there's any greens that are like absolutely should not be eaten. A lot of times how I find it out, I just am like, I have like radish greens I had one time, and I was like, I know there has to be a way to use this. So I just typed in uses for radish greens on, you know, Google, or Pinterest, honestly. Even like mustard greens, basically if it's green, like think about making it into like a pesto or some sort of spread. Because usually you can just add olive oil, garlic, lemon, and it will taste pretty good. So yeah, just kind of, if you have greens from something random, check it out online and see what other people are using. Make sure it comes from a reputable source. Usually it'll come up to like a recipe thing, and that's usually fine. So thanks for that, Jeffrey. All right, well, let's see if I have one more. Oh, no. Awesome questions. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. I really appreciate it and hope you learned at least something. And truly, if you have any questions, reach out to me. I'm not a health coach. I'm not certified in anything except health education. But I do love to talk about food, and I'm definitely open to bouncing ideas off of me. You can email me at my email here. You can find me on LinkedIn. And then I also have a food forward Instagram page, and I focus on low budget, healthy meals. So check that out too. And, send me a message if you have any questions. But, and then here's the resources slide. You can click on the links when you get the chance. But thank you. Thank you again for being here.